Julian Aldridge from Ammo Marketing. And Pilferables is a term we coined about 2 or 3 years ago, first working with Miller High Life. And as with many brands like this, brands which are a little underground, where people embrace them, but as soon as mainstream media picks up on them, as soon as they become, in their eyes, a sellout, it's all gone. So this was a very successful tactic of seeding products and items which they would value, but which they might not value if they were just given to them, in places where they naturally went. So as an example with Miller High Life, what we did was to take t-shirts and bottle openers and belt buckles and belts, all the things which this crew we call the New Blues, indie rockers into all the new indie bands, lots of tattoos and piercings, generally went to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning. Where do they shop? They don't shop at the Gap. They'd never get free stuff. They shop at thrift stores. So we created the whole driver shirts with the Miller High Life logo on them. We created t-shirts which said Miller High Life 75th anniversary, 1901 to 1976, which looked like they're 25 years old. These things got snapped up. The thrift shops loved us because we were giving them merchandise, which they sold for $2 or $3. Their dressing rooms and changing rooms in the various locations where these bands are hanging out, getting ready to play. We seated stuff there. We seated stuff with bartenders and say, hey, these are valuable, so give these bottle openers to just your favorite customers. So it's all about just simply adding value and doing it in a context, a time, a place where people are receptive to that message. Account planning, when it's done well for advertising, is nothing much more complicated than gaining great insight from which ideas are generated and then become real somewhere in the ether. We've taken exactly the same model for what we do with word of mouth and said, we can all come up with fantastic ideas, wild, crazy, zany ideas, but if they're not fundamentally rooted in an insight, which is about consumer motivation, about the passions, about their networks and their communities, then the ideas are just ideas. So we start all of our programs, and we've been doing this more and more over the last 2 years, as clients have really, I think, caught on to the need for this ethnographic research. We call it cultural intelligence. Spending time hanging out with these people, structured interviews, going through their wardrobes, their closets, hanging out with them in cars and bars, wherever they are, cars and bars not together, and figuring out what really makes them tick. Because if we can figure that, then we can provide social currency. And social currency, the way we talk about, is information, it's experiences, or it's access to things or people or places they couldn't usually do without the brand. So the brand adds value to them in that way through identifying what matters to them, the brand provides it to them, they talk about it. It's fairly simple. And I think there's a great quote from an ex-boss of mine called Tim Smith, who says, the brands that win are those whose consumers tell the best stories. He's been saying this for nearly 10 years, and it's just beginning to catch on, but that's what word of mouth is. It's when consumers tell great stories about your brand. And all we have to do as word of mouth marketers is give them positive things to talk about.